Hello everyone, and welcome to panel 2 here at the FTTH conference in London. My name is Oliver Lovelace. I'm a principal at Analysys Mason. Analysys Mason is a leading technology advisory firm. We specialize in transaction support, strategy, regulation and policy, transformation and custom research. We work with operators, governments and investors across the globe. This panel is called UK Fibre at a Crossroads. And at Analysys Mason over the last decade, we've been quite heavily involved in UK Fibre. We've worked on over 60 transactions, predominantly with altnets, but also carried out strategy projects with big and small operators and for their investors directly. We continue to be quite heavily involved in the sector, recently working on some of the largest transactions in the space and the kind of increasing wave in consolidation. We supported Fibre and VMO2 in the acquisition of Netomnia, although I promise to stay impartial on that today. We've also supported Freedom Fibre and TrueSpeed in their recent merger and continue to be active in lots of the major restructurings in the market. So clearly consolidation will be one topic that we touch on today, but we'll also look at the Telecoms Access Review, what that may mean for the market going forward. We'll touch on ARPU, and we'll touch on maybe what we see as a future market structure as well. So before we dive in, we'll get introductions from the 4 panelists here. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit briefly about the organizations that they represent, and then we'll get going. Start with Richard, on my left.
Right, thank you. Yeah, Richard Allwood. So I'm the Chief Strategy and Technology Officer at Openreach. So strategy is all about setting the long-term direction of the business, what we're investing in. Technology is all of our IT and our network electronics and optoelectronics. I think sort of doing both of those things, if anything goes wrong, it's probably my fault. That's what I figured out about my role. Openreach, I think most people are probably familiar with us. We're rolling out fibre across the UK. We've reached 23 million premises in the UK so far, and we are aiming to get to 30 million premises, so the vast majority of the UK covered with fibre from Openreach. We also run the UK's copper and VDSL fibre to the cabinet networks. That's who we are.
Thank you. Rajiv?
Hi, I'm Rajiv Datta. I'm the CEO of Fibre. Fibre is building a wholesale full fibre platform across the UK. Sitting here today, we have over 2.6 million premises passed, and as we'll talk about, we recently announced a transaction that will take that to 8 million premises passed by the end of 2027. We're very excited about that. Fibre is backed by really world-class strategic investors in Infravia Capital Partners, Liberty Global, and Telefonica. And importantly, we have a strategic partnership with Virgin Media O2, and that partnership drives 2 dimensions of our business. One is they're an anchor tenant that leverages the footprint that we are building and acquiring. And we also have a build and operate sort of partnership with them that allows us to leverage the scale and size of that operation.
Kelly?
Hi, yes, I'm Kelly Barlow. I'm Strategy and Portfolio Director at Vodafone 3. Since we merged in June of last year with the UK's largest mobile operator, we're also very active in the broadband market. We're the fastest growing broadband operator in the UK, and convergence is a really big part of what we do. My role encompasses strategy for the company as well as delivering the integration of the joint venture between Vodafone and 3.
Simon?
I'm Simon Holden from CityFibre. CityFibre is the largest challenger in the UK. We're a wholesale-only player. We are just a bit short of 5 million premises passed. We cover all the verticals, so we cover consumer, business, public sector, mobile, increasingly smart cities, maybe even AI grid as that becomes a product set. We are very, very close next few weeks to being at 1 million customers on the network, so that'll be an important milestone. Yep, that's us.
Great, thanks all. We'll start with maybe a quick fire question to start. I mean, in one word or maybe one sentence I'll allow, if you could summarize the last 5 years in UK fibre in one word or sentence, what would that be? I'll start at the end. Simon, do you want to?
Transformation. I think that the landscape in the UK, with the introduction of competition, has been transformed markedly for the better.
Come down, Kelly.
I'll say extraordinary. If you look at the scale of parallel network rollout, the amount of private investment that's gone into fibre infrastructure, it really is extraordinary. It's gone from something that's niche to something that's really widely available.
Moving down.
I'm going to go with fragmentation. I think what we all recognize now is a market that absolutely has delivered the things that Kelly and Simon have talked about, and that has been transformational, extraordinary. But we do have a fragmented structure at the end of that 5-year period that I think you described, and that fragmentation is sort of what we're addressing and dealing with now. So I think that's the key word.
For me, I think, in the industry, I'd say intense. I think the last 5 years have been intense. We've achieved a huge amount. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But it's been a pretty intense 5 years. Perhaps not as intense as the next 5 years.
Yeah, well, we'll get on to that. So just maintaining the theme of looking back for just a couple more minutes then, what's one thing that you think the sector maybe have slightly misjudged in the last 5 years? And how has that kind of led to, I suppose, the topic of this panel, the UK being at a crossroads in fibre? So yeah, who wants to go first? Richard, we'll go down.
Yeah, I think... Look, I think maybe people underestimated a little bit how competitive the UK market was and was going to be. I think maybe people underestimated Openreach a little bit. I think we get called the incumbent, and whilst I understand that, certainly not how we feel inside Openreach. It's not the way we've, not the way we've acted or tried to act, right? We try to act more like a challenger. And I think people have perhaps been a little bit surprised by how quickly we've built. And we've built almost 5 million in the financial year that's just ended, and how widely we've gone. So yeah, I think maybe people underestimate a little bit how competitive the UK market was going to be.
I think, to me, the word that strikes me on this second question is around sustainability. And if you look at all the incredible work that's been done in the altnet community over the last 5 years, it's not been an issue around build or rollout. I think, you look at the Trustpilot scores of how people are taking care of customers and that customer experience. I mean, these are all real benefits. But fundamentally, I think the business planning assumptions that were made 5 years ago perhaps did not take into consideration all of the moving parts that are required to build a sustainable platform over the long term. And I think many investors in the room and in this space, and certainly altnet CEOs, are looking at their business plans from 5 years ago and recognize that some core assumptions have not worked in the way that they were planned.
Yeah. Kelly, perhaps a retail view?
Yeah, I mean, for me, probably the biggest underestimation was how to get from build to take-up. So if you look at the UK market, we're at 70 or more than 70% homes passed, but about a third of homes taking full fibre. We need, the conversation's been more about how do we build really quickly, how do we get maximum coverage, rather than what do customers really need, do they understand the product, is it easy for them to buy, is it easy for them to use, and for me, that's where we need to shift the focus to. How do we build take-up? How do we maximise the opportunity we've got to bring fibre to consumers and businesses in the UK, because it's take-up that ultimately will drive long-term investment economics.
I would say two things. I think the first thing that was really surprising was just how much capital poured into the UK. I think when the regulators and the government set this up, they hadn't anticipated where interest rates would be and the fact that COVID would end up being a tailwind for liquidity. So actually people ended up having abundant capital and probably built faster than they had expected. The flip side of that, unfortunately, was that the government and others didn't do a great job necessarily on advertising, People thought that they had fiber when, of course, they didn't have fiber. Took a long time to address that. Not sure it's really ever been addressed. Maybe a moot point by now. One-touch switching took an absolute age to come in, and I think you've seen, penetration just grow slowly. By the way, not actually unique to the UK, but I think every market has its features, and I would say that was probably the feature that people underestimated in our case. What I would say, though, is the last 2 years, I think you've seen that agenda move on really quickly. And I think you are seeing penetration rates now accelerating, particularly from the altnets and from the kind of independent ISPs, I think, are profiting from that as well.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely feels like a sort of a growing momentum there. Simon, you mentioned sort of regulation a little bit in that. So if we think about, Ofcom have just published their telecom access review, so that sets the regulation for the next 5 years. Just before we jump into that briefly, maybe just a word on the previous review period. So Ofcom, the 2021 market review was to encourage investment and promote network infrastructure competition. So do we think that has been achieved? And do we think Ofcom would, made the right decision with that market review? So I'll start with you, Simon.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Any other?
No, let's be clear. There's no question that review drove investment, as we just talked about and Simon's described. There's no question that the investments come in. Has infrastructure been deployed? Absolutely yes. As we've talked about, there's a lot of fiber that's been rolled out. But has it delivered infrastructure competition? I would have to argue that we're not at that place yet. And between the market structure that we have, the fragmented sort of view and space and the subscale nature of what the altnet market looks like, there is not, at this point, a sustainable scaled competitor to BT Openreach. And that was the primary purpose of regulation. And clearly that part we're still working on. I'm not suggesting, we're on a track, but that part has not yet been delivered.
Richard?
Yeah, I would sort of respectfully disagree. I think it's undeniable that we've had massive investment in the UK. I think to levels, as Simon's pointed out, that were probably unexpected. And that's brought with it massive competition, and the competition is very real, and it's live, and it's out there now. I'll tell you, somebody who's in the sector every day, every week, right? We're seeing that. I think it's only going to intensify. So, I think, from a UK perspective, this is amazing, right? The investment that us and all of our sort of shareholders have invested in the UK is astounding, and the outcomes it's delivering for customers, for consumers, for businesses, in terms of having access to world-class infrastructure at very competitive prices, I think it's extraordinary. And yes, we have absolutely got more work to do to migrate all customers onto that. But I think as an outcome for the UK, what we've achieved in the last 5 years, I think is fantastic.
So moving on to the TAR, the Telecom Access Review, would it be fair to describe that as a sort of evolution rather than a revolution, which, to continue Ofcom's sort of goal to promote infrastructure competition? And do we think that the balance has been struck right between regulation on Openreach and sort of promoting continued investment and also, promoting sort of customers coming on board? Simon, do you want to start on that one?
Broadly, yes. This investment cycle was set up as a 10-year cycle. The investors want predictability, they want continuity, and I think that's broadly what's been delivered. I think, some of the kind of concerns in the way in which Openreach could circumvent some of the challenger initiatives have been kind of blocked off to some degree by Ofcom. But I think we learnt with the WFTMR that it's important that the regulator remains vigilant, because Richard and his team spend a lot of time thinking about ways in which they can, improve and grow their business. And sometimes that will be fair and sometimes that will be less fair. And we need an independent arbiter to sit in the middle of that. And so I think it's going to be important that Ofcom play that role, and I would argue perhaps play it slightly more vigorously than they played it at the start of the last cycle. because I'm sure there'll be a bunch of initiatives that come up post this. But yeah, generally I think it's a positive framework.
Richard, the OpenReach view, and just before you start, does the TAR provide the regulatory certainty that OpenReach were after to get to the 30 million?
Well, I think it's largely a continuation of the framework that was established in 2021 and that was intended and designed to be a 10-year framework, providing certainty to investors about what the kind of rules of the game were. So I think it is largely a continuation. I think for me, Ofcom could have been bolder in terms of deregulating, because I think the competition is very real, right? I mean, I mentioned that we've built to about 23 million premises. I think when you look at others who've invested in fibre, maybe they got to somewhere between 19, 20, something like that, right? So there's very significant infrastructure that's been built and that is in the ground, and that infrastructure isn't going anywhere. And yes, there'll be changes in who owns that as the market consolidates, and there are winners and losers through that process. That's sort of normal. That's competition at work. So I think Ofcom could have gone further in terms of deregulating and allow competition to play out on the merits. I think in one or two areas it's a bit complicated. We've now got 2 Area 3s, one for broadband, one for Ethernet. I think we've got quite complicated and perhaps a little. I've lost some of the policy objectives around a sort of copper withdrawal. So I think there's some areas where it's too complicated. But look, broadly it's in line with the framework that was set up, and that framework was set up to allow us to compete on the merits fairly, with all the other players in the market, and that's absolutely what we're going to continue to do, right? As we move from sort of the first part of the decade into the second, we're going to carry on, competing fairly, and yeah, that's the framework allows us to do that.
Rajiv, guessing that you don't think Ofcom, or you're glad Ofcom hasn't been bolder.
Well, depending on how you define boldness, I might have a different perspective on boldness than Richard does. I think, as I think everyone has said, and this is really important, right? The investment climate in the UK for fibre is in a perilous sort of position, and investors already are dealing with the financial stress in the marketplace. Changing the rules of the game at this point would have been catastrophic. So I do think that Ofcom has reached, has driven stability and continuity, as I think Simon described, and I think that's exactly right. I think that is crucial, and it's important at this sort of very stressed time to have that continuity. But I think it's really important to recognize, and I think they recognize this in the TAR, that BT Openreach, without question, still wields significant market power. And there's no better illustration of this than a company that builds 1 million premises per quarter, yet penetration is increasing from, I think, 35, now it's 38%, I think is the last number. That is not some groundswell of consumers that are just dying to get fibre. That is significant market power in action. If you look at what has happened, some of the offers that Openreach has offered towards the back end of last year, it's a clear reaction to the fact that, the altnet community, we are going through the struggle that we're going through, and BT Openreach wants to ensure, as they should, as a company would, try to drive their advantage in this marketplace and lock in as many customers as they can. And again, I think Ofcom has tried to find this balance with the TAR, and we are generally supportive of how they've been able to do that and keep effectively the status quo going in terms of the regulatory framework.
I mean, we want to compete. And that's, yes, we launched some offers last year, but it's all about competition, right? And the market is becoming more fragmented. Companies are innovating commercially because they're competing with one another, and we absolutely need to be part of that and will be part of that. But I think that's competition.
Okay. Kelly?
Yeah, stability is important in retail. I think that's broadly what the TAR's delivered, Another several years of certainty, whether you're building, investing, selling fibre. Competition is critical, and given the strength of Openreach, it's important that there are safeguards there. So I think, allowing discounts, but having the 120-day period of scrutiny for Ofcom strikes a sensible balance between commercial flexibility and protecting that competition.
Okay, thanks. We've obviously only got an hour, so we're pivot across the topics. So if we move on now to consolidation, which has been, kind of talked about in the UK market for several years, and recently we have seen, some momentum in that. Rajiv, the next Fibre Netomnia deal, obviously, one of the largest deal announced in the UK so far, it's been described as a game changer in terms of bringing a challenge to Openreach, although hasn't been without criticism. So first, why do you think Next Fibre plus Netomnia is better for the UK than maybe independent Netomnia?
Well, I have to be careful because Jeremy's sitting right there, so I'll be careful in what I say about that. But I think we need to recognize that this landmark transaction that we've announced has material benefits. It has benefits for the UK, it has benefits for our marketplace, and it has benefits for consumers in the end. This deal is going to unlock £3.5 billion of investment in this infrastructure at a time when, frankly, investors are running for the hills. It is very difficult not only to raise funds, but to actually invest in this marketplace given the current condition. And that 3.5 billion, by the way, does not include the value that we're paying for Netomnia. That's in addition to. So it's a huge economic jolt for the UK and for this marketplace that drives investment at a sorely needed time. The second, I think, very critical element is this discussion about trying to create a genuine, sustainable, national scale footprint that is going to create a challenger to BT Openreach. And as we talked about and I've mentioned, the fragmented space that we have created does not allow for that. And this transaction gives us 8 million premises passed by the end of next year. And as we partner with Virgin Media O2, who is also upgrading their footprint, we have a clear path to having 20 million homes of wholesale footprint eventually that we can bring to market. And that is a genuine challenger to BT Openreach. And that is such a critical element of what the entire marketplace has been set up for. But finally, this is better for consumers. In the near term, consumers, there are going to be millions of customers that will get full fiber access much faster than they would have otherwise have had. That's in the short term. But in the mid to long term, the benefits of actually having infrastructure competition to BT Openreach is going to drive more retail choice. It's going to drive better capability. Let's not forget, the BT Openreach network is a GPON network. XGS-PON is a concept, some corner of the empire somewhere. You need competitive tension to drive the innovation cycles in this market. And finally, it's going to lead to better service for customers, and that's what competition always does. So from my perspective, it's a hugely positive transaction in all of these different dimensions. We've had hugely positive reaction to it from the government. Lord Stockwood has given us a formal statement of support. I've been talking to MPs across the country around this construct of investment we're going to make in local constituencies and upgrading infrastructure. Every altnet CEO, every ISP, and we've had the phone ringing off the hook from ISPs since we've announced this deal, are all supportive, all indicate that this is what we have been waiting for in this market to drive us forward. So we're really excited about it and excited to bring this to the UK.
And Simon, CityFibre has, I suppose, cautioned that this deal risks a long-term duopoly. Is this a sign of just what happens in consolidation, or do you think there is a risk to consumers long-term?
Cool, we're 24 minutes in. Let's go. Okay. First of all, I think Virgin should be absolutely allowed to buy targets in the market. Okay? Let's also be clear, Next Fibre is a funding vehicle for Virgin's footprint expansion. Okay? That's the way it's set up. By the way, that's the way the last deal was set up. They moved cash flows out of Virgin into this business. That's what it looks like. So this is really, in my mind, a discussion about where does kind of Virgin and BT sit versus the other competitors in the market. So first point to make is, I think Virgin can buy stuff. Okay? I don't personally have an issue with Virgin growing their footprint, and I also believe that scale is important, for challengers and to compete with BT. My big reservation on this deal, and I think it's sort of obvious when you look at it, I don't think it takes intellectually really very much time to think about it. We've spent 20 years, actually almost to the month, by the way, since NTL and Telewest merged and created the platform that now sits under what's called Virgin Media. And I was involved in doing that deal 20 years ago. I think it was March '06 it happened. And in that period of time, the duopoly of that integrated cable TV business and BT did not serve the country really well. We did not achieve the penetration we needed, the innovation we needed, the service levels we needed, the pricing that we needed to be successful as a country. The UK sat at the bottom of the league tables, okay? And it was only when the government and Ofcom, to be fair, fired the starting gun to say, this isn't good enough, we want to move this forward. And we've talked about the tremendous amount of capital that flowed. So I am not confident that where you have BT and a Virgin platform, and that's all you have, you're going to get what you need in terms of competition and innovation. And I'm somewhat confident about that because Netomnia, by the way, is a great business. And Jeremy, congratulations on your award. It is really well deserved. Okay? I think you've got a great business, and the Briss business and the Netomnia business together, I think, have been fantastic. And they've built more than 3 million platform across the UK, and they're about to be, I think you're about to be at 500,000 customers. Okay? In that footprint, that disruptive player was creating a choice for customers with better service, better products, better pricing. That is competition. By the way, the Virgin customers could have chosen to be on that network, and many of them did. And this deal collapses that back down to basically being across 80% of the footprint of Netomnia, back down to 2 networks again. And that is my reservation on the deal. Okay? We've spent a lot of time and effort creating competition, and now Virgin has just taken that, on the face of it, very successful competitor, by the way, no financial distress at all, and just collapsed it back down, and we're back down to 2 networks. We've taken away the choice, we've taken away potentially the innovation, we've taken away potentially the pricing power that comes with that incremental. The aggregate that's been added to the Virgin footprint to drive scale by this transaction is 3%. Just over 600,000 new premises added to the Virgin footprint out of the 3 million that were acquired. And so my concern is 3 to 2 networks is a substantial lessening of competition. I'm going to part the fact that representatives of Virgin have, for the last 5 years, been saying, A, that they will upgrade their entire network to fibre by 2028, clearly not happening, and B, that it only costs them £100 to do that per premise passed. If you look at the price they pay for Netomnia, there's a disconnect there that I personally don't understand. So I have real reservations about this from a competition perspective. The good news is I don't get to decide. Okay? We have a competition authority in the UK that is independent and objective and is data-driven, and we have a regulator that is independent, objective, and data-driven, and they ultimately are going to be the arbiters, the key decision makers on this. But I just sort of think a 3 to 2 merger with really not much scale added, isn't certainly pro-competitive, and I would argue is actually anti-competitive.
So if I may, by the way, I should just align with Simon. We are also glad that he doesn't get to decide, so I just want to put that out there, because I do think that Ofcom and CMA will get facts and deal with what I would call are misleading statements about the transaction. So let's start with some of the key elements. This concept of overlap needs to get addressed head on, right? We're talking in comparing a cable network to a full fiber network. It is not what we're building as a wholesale platform. HFC is not a wholesale-ready technology, as we know. It's not appropriate for that, and therefore, the construct of this overlap is mixing apples and oranges. You might as well throw in carrier pigeon networks as well as a possible way of transmitting information. So at the end of the day, the overlap is not between fiber networks in the way that we are discussing here is point one. I guess the key element of this is this view that fundamentally this is not going to create or is going to remove competition, But what it's actually going to create are wholesale platforms on this footprint that will drive more retail competition in the midterm to long term. And I think this 3-to-2 oversimplification is mixing, again, apples and oranges. But I think the more interesting thing for me is this construct of thinking about this as moving towards a duopoly and thinking that that is like where we once were. And we need to be very clear. There has never been infrastructure competition in the UK, period. You're talking about retail competition from how many ever years ago you mentioned, Simon. That is not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about creating infrastructure competition, something where BT Openreach has been unchallenged for its history. So adding competition, adding a framework of that is a massive step forward in the competitive tension in the marketplace is point number one. Point number two, which I'm not quite clear why Simon is concerned about a duopoly. As far as I'm aware, Fibre is alive and well. You're doing great. I think your strategy director at a recent conference talked about the fact that post this deal, you guys see lots of M&A, lots of consolidation opportunities. So to me, in the end, Fibre is still there, and you have every opportunity to continue that consolidation journey. There's another 14 million premises available to consolidate. So I'm not sure whether the concern you have is the competitive environment for the UK, or whether you're concerned about Fibre having competition. And I think that therein lies the question around what is driving the discussion, because at the end we all know, and I think we're all aligned on the view that we need this framework, we need these scale challengers to actually drive competition and do what we're all here to do, which is actually create a challenge to Richard, right, and his organization.
Simon, I'll let you come back briefly, and then we're...
Well, of course I care about Fibre. I'm the CEO of the company. I'm passionate about our business. But as it happens, none of my network overlaps with the NetOmnia network. So from my perspective, that is not, I'm not worried about that aspect of it at all. As a country, I do care about it. I live here, I'm a Brit. I'm in this industry. I think, we've been underserved by the incumbents. I think we've made a decision that we want to move away from that. That is my concern. Okay, it's just to pop it on the table. And as I say, it's not my decision, but my view is this doesn't serve the country well.
Okay, so moving on. Richard, general consolidation now. What's the thing that worries maybe Openreach the most, right? So Simon talked about there, perhaps a duopoly. Is it the case of a scaled wholesale or multiple wholesale networks, or sort of regional players?
Look, I mean, it's really clear. There's been this wave of investment into UK infrastructure, and continues to be investment in UK infrastructure. And that means there is competition now, and that competition is going to get more intense. And exactly how the cards fall is kind of less important than that macro piece, right? Certainly with an Openreach, we're very, very clear that we're going to be, in this competition. We already are. It's going to intensify, and therefore we need to be ready for that. We need to be alive to that. We need to be, agile and innovative and nimble and thinking about that, right? So I think, is there going to be consolidation? Yeah, I think, clearly, right? I mean. There are scale economies that sort of play out in telecoms. I think we've seen that through the cable consolidation. We saw that through the LLU consolidation. So I fully expect that will happen, over the coming years. And if that helps to, create, larger, more sustainable business, that's good consolidation. We welcome that. But from our perspective, exactly what form that takes doesn't really matter, right? The networks have been built, and now we're in this competition to fill them, and that's what we're focused on.
And Kelly, I guess Vodafone is perhaps a beneficiary, right? You sell on Fibre and you sell on Openreach. Vodafone's been one of the ISPs in the UK, has been growing quite consistently on its fixed broadband base. So what do you kind of look for from a network partner, and what does good alignment look like from a wholesale network to its retail ISP?
Great question. Yes, as you say, we've pursued an asset-light strategy, working with a number of partners to provide the most flexibility and choice to our customers, so we can offer really compelling propositions to them, and that's worked very well for us. You know, we can offer a footprint of over 22 million fibre homes to our customers, as well as FWA, which is a fantastic complementary mobile broadband product, and that has led to fantastic growth that we've seen in our broadband business. In terms of what we look for in a partner, it's really, can they serve our customers well? Do they have a good quality product? Can we offer good value for money through the partnership? And are they as passionate as we are about driving sustained improvements in customer experience? That really, really means a lot to us. So that is what we look for. Now, is it realistic for us to integrate with dozens of small subscale operators? No, it's not, because it's not operationally or commercially viable. But you know, a number of partners with the appropriate kind of scale and quality of proposition is what we look for.
Okay. And Simon, a quick one following up, I think, on what you said about maybe wider M&A. Obviously, in the UK, we're seeing some altnets come together in kind of, you know, trying to build scale in, let's say, a group structure. How does CityFibre think about those groups, and kind of what is CityFibre's strategy for the next kind of couple of years on M&A?
I think you're beginning to see, you know, a clustering of different players, different roll-ups happening. My experience of this, and I've been doing that part of the business for decades now, you know, it never happens quite as quickly as you think, and then suddenly you turn around and a lot has happened. And I can sort of see that at different levels, different sizes, those combinations are coming together. And you know, this is driven actually by the sellers and what do the sellers want. There can be a lot of buyers out there, but ultimately the seller has got to decide that they want to sell on the terms that the buyer's prepared to offer. But I think what you're seeing is quite some momentum now in the market, those combinations. We've done a few. I expect that we will do a few more. No one's going to do deals that don't make economic sense for them, but you can see more and more we are converging on terms that people are finding acceptable, and so I think we will see. You know, there's never a big bang. Okay, this stuff kind of happens. There's one or two a quarter. We've had a couple this year, and you know, I think we'll see that momentum, and that we're going to participate in that.
Cool. We move briefly on to ARPU. So at the retail layer, we've seen, you know, quite aggressive acquisition pricing now from national ISPs, kind of reacting to how maybe altnets and, you know, vertically integrated altnets in particular have kind of priced aggressively to win customers. I suppose a broad question: where do we see ARPU, both retail and wholesale, going over the next 5 to 10 years, and how can that grow in the UK market? So Kelly, do you want to maybe touch on the retail side first, and then?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the non-negotiable in ARPU is that there needs to be affordability in the market long term to drive mass market take up. Sustainability of competition is a function both of, you know, of ARPU, but also of take up. And we, as an independent retailer, play a very important role in driving take up of fibre across the market. With the right commercial terms. The way we think about growing value with our customers is the whole proposition. So the fibre that we provide to them, but also the Wi-Fi experiences we can give them, how we drive convergence, and working with wholesale partners is a great way to build those differentiated propositions.
Rajiv, from a wholesale network point of view?
Well, I mean, I'll just comment generically. I will talk about wholesale as well, but fundamentally, the retail ARPUs that we are now seeing are clearly not sustainable, and I think everyone knows this, especially at the promotional levels that we're at. And you know, frankly, you know, from an altnet perspective, we've moved from all crowing about how big our footprint is and how many homes we've passed to how many people we've connected and how many homes we've connected, which of course is the right evolution. But all homes connected are not equal. It really depends on at what price you're doing that. The capital intensity of connecting customers is real. It's a real cost. And therefore, some of the financial distress that we're seeing is not necessarily getting materially better by virtue of adding to take up at price points and ARPU levels that are not sustainable and will not work. And you see that. I mean, if you look at ISP Review in any given morning and you see who the best deals are, some of them are from names that would shock you in terms of the prices that are in the market. And everyone's competing, as Richard said, it's a highly competitive market, people are in there, but we all know that this is yet another sign of the lack of health right now within that marketplace. So of course, the answer is, and if you talk to anyone in the altnet space about what their intent is, the answer is always, well, we're going to walk it up over time and we're eventually going to get to a better place. So it's always about that dynamic of the future. From a wholesale perspective, of course, the market is driven by BT Openreach and the regulation, and that is a very important element of it. But it requires discipline. And certainly, there's some who have offered incredibly low wholesale prices in the market. Again, I'm sure to get take up. And again, we're gonna have the same challenge of sustainability of that over time. So to me, obviously, we need to focus on affordability and we need to put ourselves in the context of the economy that we're in. But these are very capital-intensive investments over long periods of time, and you have to find a structure that actually returns something to the investors over time. And I would argue we're not quite there in the market today.
Richard?
Yeah, so I think, if I remember my economics correctly, right, pricing ultimately is a function of cost, your cost base, in a competitive market. And then, whether there's differentiation that you can create that customers value that allows you for a period to extract a little bit of a premium on that. So then if you think about, what are the things that are important if that's your model and you want to get a return as an investor, I think there are three things, right? So number one is cost, right? And in fiber, that starts with the build cost, right? Because if you spend too much building the network, it's going to be hard in a competitive market to get a return on it. Then you've got the provision of a connection cost, which I agree, I think it was also a little bit underestimated, right? Connecting a customer, that final piece from the pole or the underground box in our case, into the home, that's another piece of civil engineering work that, carries some cost, right? So provision cost, and then there's the running costs. Running costs of a fiber network for us as well, because we're running the copper network, we have that to consider as well, which is a special case for us. Others maybe consolidating, and then there's a cost of integration and consolidation to continue. So cost is sort of fundamental, right? Secondly, then comes customer experience. Right, telecoms is generally a subscription business, right? And churn is the enemy of any sort of subscription business. So we have to dial up the focus we're putting on customer experience, both in life and at those sort of key points, like when a customer's been connected to the network. So completely echo what Kelly's been saying in terms of, we need to improve that. And then thirdly, I think it's about the sort of commercial innovation. We have got our first XGS-PON customer, so I just want to correct that. We are starting to roll out XGS-PON. But commercial innovation in terms of product, in terms of portfolio, in terms of pricing, and that's why that's so important to compete. So I think it's those three things fundamentally that are going to sort of underpin the trajectory of ARPUs at retail and wholesale levels.
Simon, anything to add on ARPU from the City Fibre side?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just haven't seen a telecommunications market, I want to say almost globally, where pricing has gone up. Okay, so I think, if you're hoping for pricing to go up and that's what your business model is dependent on, yeah, good luck. I mean, I think, you need to set your business in a way which, certainly as a challenger, we can offer great value compared to the incumbents. Right? We need to offer great service, we need to offer a full range of products, and it needs to be done on economic terms that look really attractive. And that's what it's about. And if you're a long-run investor, you can set your pricing on a long-run basis, and that model can work if you execute well against that. So I think, I don't think we're sitting here thinking that Openreach is going to drive down its pricing. I think there's probably some flexibility, but I think they've not probably got too much appetite to do that. They've made some commitments to the financial markets, around cash flows, etc. So I think they'll do some moves, but I think that's where that's going to be. But I think if you want to compete, you've got to be lower than that. And I don't know. I mean, next Fibre will kind of see, I guess, how that evolves. Of course, they're not.
The question is how much lower, Simon? The question is how much lower than that do you need to be? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I think we're relatively clear where we sit in the market, right? We're kind of 30 to 40% cheaper than the incumbent, and we think that's sustainable. And by the way, we've got 40 wholesale customers sitting on our network. We're adding about 1% penetration a month. That feels to us today like a good formula that seems to be working, quite well. I think that's why we are a mature wholesale platform now, and that's why I think it's working. And I think if you want to be competitive, you've got to be prepared to put attractive economics in front of the customer too. I'm not sure that we're certainly not anticipating that we have to drive that up.
But I guess back to the point that I think Richard was making, it also comes down to costs, not just about providing that positioning relative to the incumbent. It's about how does that reduced cost relate to your cost structure. And given the level of debt and all of the other costs that I'm sure we all have, and you have as well, the question is that a sustainable price point? I think that is the key point. And can that actually, will time actually solve that problem without walking up customers? I wonder whether that's possible from a pure math and physics perspective.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the physics comment, but certainly at CityFibre, I think we understand what those parameters are. We're a highly automated business. By the way, our big customers like Vodafone want us to be automated. They're dealing with millions of customers on lots of different product lines. They want us to be highly automated. That's what we're about. I know if you go onto the next Fibre site, if you go up, if you call the 0333 helpline, you flip immediately into, hi, it's Virgin Media. That is not a low-cost exercise. That is not a highly automated type of business. And I think, we've got to get to, by the way, AI in its kind of widest sense, I think is really supportive of these models. It's a tailwind, I think, both in terms of demand, but also in terms of managing the cost base too. So, I'm not concerned about our model and where we are in that paradigm.
Yeah, we nearly made it through a whole panel without AI.
Sorry.
We're getting towards the end now, so we start to think about sort of the future market and where that would go. So one thing we've kind of not really spoken about today is build, naturally, because we've moved beyond that. But one area where build continues is in rural areas, and on the panel we have the two largest Project Gigabit contract holders. That's the UK government subsidy scheme. That's obviously, Simon's been well documented pivot for CityFibre and looking at those. So maybe just a brief on how that's going, what are the challenges ahead for CityFibre, and how does it kind of underpin the wider business case now?
Yeah, I don't think we ever really thought about it as a pivot at all, really. It was just a natural extension of building in cities and continuing to go out where there was a need. We embarked on this at a point in time when the government was looking for solution providers. We were a solution provider. By the way, I think at that point in time, there was no concept that BT would build to 30 million, right? I think that's been new news as that's evolved. I'm really thrilled, by the way, to hear Richard confirm that you're going to 30 million, because I know there was some discussion around if you didn't get what you wanted in the TAR, you wouldn't go there. But I think, frankly, if BT is going to 30 million, then there'll be a lot of places that might have been eligible for subsidy, which the taxpayer shouldn't be subsidising. So I think that the government will do a bunch of work around that. But look, we've done 150,000, say, rural premises, some subsidised, some not, but kind of in that area. And I think for us, we'll continue doing that and working hard with the government to deliver what they need us to deliver. If they say they don't need it, they don't need it. That wouldn't make sense for us either. So,
Richard, from an Openreach point of view, your contract's probably much broader, right? It kind of mops up those contracts that are handed back by some altnets and kind of sporadic build across. So how does Openreach manage that with their overall build? And how important is it for Openreach to kind of build to all of these rural premises in terms of what you want to do in the future?
Yeah, it is. It's really important. I mean, we've worked with BDK for a number of years, building out, FTTP, and it, typically, as you say, we are doing some of the hardest to reach premises. So it really does draw on our sort of engineering ingenuity and innovation to be able to get to those at the lowest possible cost. I mean, I think one of the things that has surprised us the most, going back to one of your earlier questions, actually, is how far we can push our commercial program in more rural areas. I think that is, we built, I think, something like 9 million already in kind of rural areas, and we're continuing with our commercial build there. But where it's not economic and some public subsidy is required, then working with BDUK is important for us, an important part of our plan, and will continue to be. And we where others have failed, we have picked up some of that in our contract. So yeah, it's an important part of the overall plan. Yeah.
And does that commercial build include building over other premises that have already been built through subsidy?
Look, we're not. It will do in some cases. Well, it could do in some cases. Yeah, I mean, we look at what is commercial for us, right? That's the kind of question that we ask ourselves. Not, is somebody else there, or what's happened sort of historically, and what's commercial for us also can change over time, right? Because the UK isn't sort of static. So somebody might go and plonk a great big housing estate over there that we go and fibre in competition with others, and that therefore unlocks some other places next to it that didn't look as though they were commercial 5 years ago, but now are, right? So it's not a sort of static picture. It's an evolving picture. So yeah, we're focused on what's commercial for us, and then where it isn't, and BDUK, and we can work with them to expand our network with the subsidy program. That's what we do.
That's fair. So yeah, I think we're pretty much getting to time. So if we think about, if the UK market is to reach a sustainable, which is a word we've talked about a lot today, sustainable kind of end state in the next 5 to 10 years, what's one decision that can no longer be deferred or kicked down the road? Who wants to just kick off? Rajiv?
To me, it's pretty clear. We need to move from talking about consolidation to moving with urgency around consolidation. The lights are flashing red, I think, for the altnet market. Companies are now going bust or getting restructured. Investment is drying up, as we all know, in this sector. Consolidation is vital, and fundamentally, this is Britain's broadband moment. So we need to sort of get on with it and actually start acting and moving on this important sort of part of what we need to get to.
Kelly?
I think it's a broad point around the sustainability, scale, and long-term value of the market. How can we make sure that the investment that's been put into infrastructure reaches as many customers, as many premises, as many businesses as possible? And for me, a sustainable, competitive wholesale market is a crucial part of that.
Simon?
Competition, competition, competition. Competition is the motivation and the answer to almost all of these questions. Yeah, and I'm much less concerned about the red lights that Rajiv is seeing. I think this when you deploy a lot of capital, that needs to be sorted through. I'm very confident with the quality investors we have in this market that we will sort through all of that stuff. But the key thing we need to hold on to is competition. That is what will serve the country the best.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to crack on and compete, so I would agree with Simon in that regard. I think for me it's all about now driving the take-up, right? We built these platforms, they are full of platforms. We've got, I think, 8.8 million customers on our platform, so it's not like it's empty, but there's still loads more to go at. And so really driving take-up, refining the customer experience, and making sure that people benefit from this investment, including parts of society that maybe are more vulnerable or critical national infrastructure. Driving that so it can get the benefit of the investment. I think that's kind of where we need to focus for the next 5 years.
And what's one thing that you're maybe more optimistic about now than you were 2 years ago?
That's a good question. Well, I don't know if I'm more into. I do come back to my sort of remarks about the, what we're sort of doing here for the UK, right? I mean, I think the telecoms industry stands in quite stark contrast to some other parts of kind of UK infrastructure. We've seen massive deployment of private capital. We've seen, working with BDUK, multiple companies use some public money to push that a little bit further, and we've delivered some fabulous infrastructure for the UK. I don't think that's true in other parts of the sector, and sometimes I think that's a little bit lost in how we sort of talk about what we're achieving as an industry. So that's, I was optimistic about that 2 years ago, but I guess I'm a bit more optimistic about that now.
Rajiv, you talk about red lights, but something you're optimistic about?
I'm very optimistic that we are actually going to build that scale challenger to BT Openreach. And I think, again, we have to go back to the beginning. What was the intent of the deregulation? What are we trying to sort of drive in this marketplace? And I can see now a path where we are going to build that scale, and we will be able to bring that challenge to BT Openreach. And of course, that'll improve lives for everyone, for consumers, in the end, in terms of a structure that drives those benefits. I do think that that's a path I can see.
Okay.
Well, look, I'm optimistic about our role as a force in the broadband market. As Vodafone 3, we're a stronger force in the market, bringing more choice and competition than ever, and that's good for customers.
Simon?
I'm confident about penetration. We're about to be 1 million customers. Jeremy's at 500,000. Graham from Community Fibre's at 500,000. This is playing out in a way in which customers are moving and customers are getting choice. We just need to hold on to it. I'm feeling really, pretty positive about that issue that has concerned many people for a long time. We are moving through that.
And it's maybe ending how we started. If we think about one word or one sentence, probably some of it has just been touched on, but if you're looking at how you would summarize the next kind of 1 year or next 5 years in your businesses or the UK market, what is that kind of one focus word or one sentence? I guess maybe take up, penetration, competition, but are there other things that you're going to be kind of laser focused on?
I would say faster. That's the word. Let's go faster.
Convergence.
Integration comes to mind because we have some of that coming up, yeah.
Customer experience and competition.
Very good. Great. Well, I think I'm all out of questions. We're a couple of minutes short, but if there are any other closing statements from the panel on? No? Brilliant. Well, I think we can end it there, and everyone can have a 90 seconds extra of lunch. So good stuff.